tells you that so much. But I think casting Michelle Williams is very provocative in that regard. She looks like someone who could be doing this almost in a kind of touristy way, or trying it out, or as a youthful experiment. Now, whether you mean to be poor or you're born into it, if you don't have money, you're still in trouble. But I just think that there's an aspect that maybe Wendy was also someone with money before.
And I mean the people that encountered.
Oh, no, I agree with you. I'm just saying that I think that part of the complexity of the movie is that Wendy may be one of those people as well, even if she's not that thing by the time the movie starts.
Okay.
But your point is, your point stands. I think in some ways it's one of the weaker aspects of the movie, that divide between rich, mean, poor, nice is so obvious.
Kamran?
Yeah, I really like the fact that the boredom of it is always appearing as you talk about it. So if I may just say something and then I ask a question. We have like two types of encounter in the movie. One is deeply metaphysical, because Heidegger believes that it's the time of boredom when metaphysical questions are, but it's not a fancy thing to say. It says that when time passes, we know we're alive, because there are passages. So here we go, in the middle of this boring thing, three tripartite things happen. Three type of men appear. The one that you mentioned, the good Christian boy with a cross.
Mm-hmm.
He has no understanding of the meaning of what he's doing, just he's doing it. So he could be a perfect citizen in a fascist system, a good liberal, a good socialist, whatever. So the second guy is the petit bourgeois with a bow tie. Simply watches, no judgment. Okay, so it was proven to ship her to the jail. Then the third character, also with a character, is the gray ponytail, the core of human conscience. Basically the guy who understands quietly like a mountain whatever passes through. He never loses sight of judgment, which Hannah Arendt says that that's what the people of Germany should have done when fascism happened, because all you're left with is judgment. But where do we get judgment? It comes with the aesthetic question. Kant says that the favorite philosopher Arendt, who had so much trouble with these blasé people, that Kant says that, why do we have art? Why do we have the power of speech to talk about art? Because it is only with the exercise of us judging beauty that we are preparing ourselves to judge justice. So here we go, come back to the question that I had. The three things that's also parallel to this happened, the dog, the car, and a girl, which is binds all those three with these two. Heidegger says that things exist when they stop working. So the car actually exists when it stops working. Lucy comes to life when she is lost. For who? For what? So finally, when everything falls apart, she goes on the trip. Now tell me, this is the question that I have. Is it true that we are only found when we are lost?
Well, you said two things that I really like, which has to do with the fact that, you know, the metaphysical aspect of art is often activated in the moments that seem boring, because things, when you have time to contemplate, everything becomes more interesting. Whereas when you have no time to contemplate, when a movie is really fast, when a TV show is really fast, when a lot of things are happening, you're just following the plot instead of thinking about meaning. So the first thing you said in your comment, I agree. Secondly, that idea that things only begin when they stop working, or the car only exists when it stops working, I think you're right. I think that to some extent this is about things that both this character and we as an audience may take for granted. And you don't start thinking about what those things mean until you lose them. So the car is something that she takes for granted until it doesn't work. The companionship of her dog is maybe something, not that she takes for granted, but she relies on, and then when it's gone, she kind of loses herself. As to where she fits into your scheme as the third part, and what it means that, does her journey only really begin at the end of the film now that she's divested herself of these things? I'm not sure. I think that you're thinking about things in a very elevated philosophical way, which is good, because even though I don't think Kelly Reichardt was thinking about Heidegger or Hannah Arendt when she made the film, not because it's a silly observation, and she actually teaches philosophy as well as film. I just think that she is more thinking about making a film that is spacious enough that someone like yourself can bring these things to it and find space to put them into the movie. So I guess it's a valid interpretation, but I don't think it's the artistically intended one necessarily by Kelly Reichardt.
Okay. Just to make sure that I have all the names, because my pen didn't work. So Shahzad, Parisa, Ahmad, Mobile, Rose, Sina. Anybody else want it? They want it? You didn't? Okay.
And you didn't, okay.
all over the place. You would heard. Moment, did you have a question?
Yes.
Shahzad?
You mentioned Night Moves and its similarity to this movie, which I don't really see.
But you saw Night Moves.
Yes, I did. I love that movie, but I didn't connect much with this movie. Just quickly, you mentioned in Night Moves the characters become paranoid. I personally think it showed the breakdown within the outsiders. They
Yeah.
break down. Anyway, coming back to this movie, I was wondering what do you think about the phone conversation of the girl with her sister and brother-in-law? We didn't know who she was talking to until she mentioned their address in the town. What was the significance of this relationship and this conversation?
I think it's a good question because that's the moment that I think really illustrates how Reichert wants to give you just enough to put several ideas in play without telling you which one of them it is. When you hear that conversation, it could very easily mean that this is someone who's estranged from her family, or whose family is estranged themselves sort of from her, that her family doesn't want to hear from her, or that maybe they really do want to hear from her and she's made this arrangement with her sister, sort of like, please not tell them, you know, where she is. Like, it's a very, very ambiguous conversation. So again, I'm not trying to be evasive in answering it because it's a good question, and it's the moment where, it's the only moment where her backstory really comes into it. And it's just so strategically vague, you know? She could have written 2 lines in that conversation that would tell us everything about this character. You don't need a whole scene or a whole flashback. She could have had 2 lines where she would say something to her sister on the phone that would explain why she's there, why she's driving, why she left, what she wants, what happened. And Reichert chooses to leave that out. And I think that as film goers, sometimes when we see these things like that in a film, it's just because it's a bad film, or because the director didn't think of it, or because their dramaturgy is lazy. Here what I would say, and this wasn't necessarily specifically addressed to you because you seem to like that aspect of it, but for people who found that part of the film frustrating, if you don't like that aspect of it, that's totally valid, but I wouldn't mistake it for something she isn't aware of. She's very aware that she's withholding that information and not telling you why things are happening. If you don't like that she does that, or if you find that to be an unsuccessful approach to drama, that's fine, but it's purposeful. So my interpretation of it is that she's had some break with her family. And she's young enough and probably early enough in her life that that's one of the things that's made her really want to have nothing to do with them and to drive away and to go on the road. But that's only what I think. I'm not necessarily right because you can only know what the film tells you.
Okay. Amir?
I have a question about this movie and its relationship to Bresson, because one also talks about Bresson and Balthazar, but I see similarity between this movie and Mouchet.
Yep.
In so many ways. For example,
For sure.
She is like the character is also like a young woman, and or there is animal centrality in the Mouchet also. You see the scene of rabbits alone, and this rabbit tells a lot about what would happen to the Mouchet at the end of the movie. So poverty, which is very central, and suicide. I see this in the last scene, like the suicide of Mouchet. You argue that it is somehow his salvation is the moment of his happiness, but I see it as moments of very loneliness and isolation. Maybe my interpretation is different. I just want to know more what you think of his relationship to, because you argue that her movies are compared with international filmmakers, with which filmmakers, and what was the influence of, like, for example, Bresson, or his style of acting or performance?
So again, like I know Kelly a bit, but I wouldn't speak for her because it's her film and not mine. I think that one of the reasons maybe that she's compared to international filmmakers is because we're used to American films being very impatient, and to American films being very fast, or to American films being very commercial. So anytime an American director makes something more like this, critics want to say, well, this reminds me of Italian films from the 40s. I heard someone mention Antonioni, which is depending on the Antonioni film, it's not a bad comparison. I think Bresson is a good comparison. I think that Ho Xiaoshen, the Taiwanese character, is a good comparison. People have compared it to certain Iranian filmmakers as well. Certainly, if you look at a film like Old Joy, people have compared it to some extent to Kiarostami with Taste of Cherry. But I think that that's because people are trying to find a general way to say, this is film as poetry, as opposed to film as story. And then they take whatever international film they've seen and they like, and they compare it to this. When you mentioned Mouchette, I think you're right, because Mouchette has also been a character who is lonely and alienated and melancholy. I mean, Kelly isn't so cruel as to have her film end with suicide the way that Bresson's does. I mean, to me, the filmmaker who she's a lot like is Roberto Rossellini or Vittorio De Sica, the Italians of the 1940s. I think that this is American neorealism. Whoever mentioned that phrase, I think, is correct. Doesn't mean it's exactly the same, but what were the neorealist Italian films about? They were about a country that had poverty, that had divisions between rich and poor, and that had a lot of ordinary people who were struggling to find that place. And so even though I can't compare Italy in the 40s to America in the 2000s too closely, I think that both the 1940s Italy and America now allow space for people to make movies on this particular topic, of feeling like you don't fit in and not being able to buy into it as well because you just simply do not have the money. So poverty as a common denominator between De Sica and Kelly Riker would be one way I think you could do that.
Okay, Matt?
Just wanted to get your perspective on a few things. One is around the interaction with the parents, which it was a mention with family.
Yeah.
The other is around 4 stereotypes in there, and also some contradictions. So one is around the interaction, the sense that I got from the sister was, it's almost like, oh, she's in trouble again. And it gave that sense about, there's that rich kid kind of, well, got himself in trouble, and now I can't do this anymore. It's like register trap, right? So a bit of a tourist on this journey. The other is around the 4 stereotypes. I found the store clerks, the 2 ladies, dumb bimbos. Oh, she doesn't even know what she saw. Very, very stereotypical in a poor town. Bad teeth, bad hair, all the above. The mechanic, very stereotypical. The security guard's role, very stereotypical, and the hobo's role, that's just talking blah blah blah, right? Those very and I'm wondering what would they have that in the film? And the other thing was around the contradictions. One is around, so what she was feeding the dog, like pedigree iron, they were all high brands, right? And so why would she do that? And the other one is, she had $500. So to me, theft comes at the point of despair. It doesn't feel like $500 is the point of despair, because I can buy a Fleck to Alaska with that as well.
It's not exactly Jean Valjean stealing a loaf of bread. And you're right. It's really, really a good question. The fact that she seems to want to feed the dog better food than she's eating for herself is also interesting. She seems to want this dog to have more comfort than she has. She's willing to steal, which is so dumb, to get this, to get the dog, this food, even though she could pay for it. I mean, I hesitate because I don't want, not that I think any of you are expecting this, but I don't want to definitively interpret the film, because I'm happy to do that with some films that I think have a definite meaning. With this one, I can only guess. But what you said about her seeming to some extent like a rich kid who maybe got into trouble one too many times, I feel that in this film. I don't know if it's a question of being in trouble, but I think the book that she's reading, and I think the attitude that she's taking, and I think just the fact that they cast a glamorous movie star as Michelle Williams indicates maybe that this is not someone who's experiencing this from the ground up, but maybe someone who's experiencing this as a series of steps down, as a series of consequences of her choices. And maybe that's why she would steal the dog food. Maybe that's why she would buy high dog food brand instead of the smaller thing. I think this is someone who maybe took certain things for granted and is now having a hard time in a situation where she's not able, literally or figuratively, to afford doing that. But the other thing is that scene where she steals the dog food, I don't know how any of you felt watching her. Like, she lies about it, and then she tries to say, I'm sorry, and then she tries to put it away. So what should happen to her, right? I mean, we hate that kid because he's smarmy and because he's obnoxious and because he's really nasty and refuses to let it go. I mean, she did break the law, I don't think that she's treated in terms of what the cops book her for and what they do. You know, she's not thrown in a maximum security prison. She's not beaten. I mean, she's booked for theft because that's what she did. Like, that's what I mean by there's a lot of space for judgment. And you're right. She had the money to pay for it and she didn't. And that is not a noble thing. That's not les mis, you know? And I think that is part of what makes this film so difficult to read, because if we go down that road and we say, well, she was dumb to steal it, she shouldn't have done it, she could have paid for it, she deserves what she gets, I don't know if any of us feel that way. But it certainly could have been written differently. It could have been written that she was down to her last dollar, and she had to do this or her dog was going to starve to death. And the fact that Kelly Reichardt chose to not write it that way and chose to not stage it that way means that that detail that you brought up, that contradiction you brought up, it is important. I agree with you.
Okay, more about it? Okay, Rose?
I want to say three things. One is, if I may, I want to disagree with you on Lucy's encountering with that homeless guy. I think my perception was that she was raped because of the reactions afterwards. You know, she was sobbing in the bathroom and other things. And my other question is about the security guy's relationship with Holy Saint.
Yeah.
Because he was wearing civil clothing, so I wonder if there was a relationship between those two, or he was rescuing that girl, or what?
So sorry, what did, I just missed what you said about this, about the security guard. What did you say at the very beginning of
With
it?
Holy Saint, you know, the girl in the car. You remember?
The girl in the car, do you mean the woman who picks him up?
Her woman, I think, at the end of the movie, that when he
drives in
He
with
was
the woman
calling her
in the
Holy
car.
Saint.
I think he was his girlfriend. His girlfriend.
It was a young woman that was in the car.
Oh, I
with a lot of
see.
makeup.
Holly.
Yeah, Holly, oh, I see, I
Holly,
see.
so
Yeah.
Yeah, I
she has a
think,
son.
no, I think that that's just his girlfriend. I think that that's just his partner. I think he refers to having one. I think he says something like, "We live here," so I think that that's just his partner. I didn't see her as another girl who he was rescuing, or as a version of Wendy. I'm sorry I didn't sit in and watch that part now, because I would have a fresher image in my mind, but I didn't see that as a significant or an ambiguous detail.
Because when he was calling her Holy Saint, she was like as if she's like ashamed or something, that, and like her makeup like made me to think.
No, the name of the girl was Holly. I don't think he said Holy Saint.
Is that a girl that was in the car that the old man was coming? But then didn't he
Her
say
name
that
was
I just
Holly.
dropped her from school or something like that?
No, they said that they were going to drop Holly's son at the school.
Oh, Holly's son.
That's why
Oh, okay.
it was on his day off.
Yeah,
Let
and
Holly
and
see this. That
and
would
again,
give me $7.
if I had just watched the scene, oh yeah, he said, "Don't let her see this." Yeah. If I had seen the scene, I could maybe speak more to why it might have seemed strange, but I don't have it fresh in my mind.
Okay. All right.
I have another question.
Go on.
I'm just curious. Have you watched the film Vagabond?
By Agnes Varda? Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
terrific movie.
So I'm curious which one do you prefer, because
Oh, that's
this
it.
film reminded me of that.
So Vagabond is a film by Agnes Varda starring Sandrine Bonnaire, also about a sort of homeless, transitory woman. I mean, I actually hadn't thought of that comparison. That's a really good one also, because Agnes Varda is a filmmaker who I think Kelly Reichardt has said that she admires. I mean, I don't know if it's a question of which I prefer. I think to some extent they're similar. I think Vagabond is darker. I mean, Vagabond has a much darker ending than Wendy and Lucy does, but they're somewhat similar in that they're sort of about the vulnerability and loneliness of these young women. Vagabond's a really good film. If any of you haven't seen it, that's a really good suggestion. I wouldn't have thought to compare those two movies, but I think you're right.
Okay.
I guess Vagabond's slightly better.
Sina?
Thank you so much for a great presentation. My question is about the movie director. As you said, that she has made most of her movies in Oregon or Portland.
Yeah, Portland.
And I just want to know why. Also, as far as I know, most of her movies were based on the novel written
By John Raymond.
Yes, I just want to know why she sort of stuck to this occasion also.
Well,
this
John-
person, or wouldn't she be sort of criticized or like by sort of repeating herself?
Well, I mean, River of Grass was in Florida, so that's the one that's not in Oregon. And all the other ones are, you know, in Oregon, or in the case of Meek's Cutoff, they're set sort of in that basic area of the United States on the way to California. I think one of the reasons she makes movies in Oregon, and this is where, again, it's interesting, or maybe not, or tense, or maybe not, to talk about politics, because it's considered a blue state. I mean, she's a very, very political person. And I think that one of the reasons that she's so interesting to me, and I want to write about her, and I have written about her, is she's a left-wing filmmaker who criticizes aspects of left-wing politics, which doesn't mean that she's right-wing. So she kind of makes everybody unhappy, because a lot of conservative people see the films and just find them boring or find them nonsensical or say, I could care less about what old hippies are doing. Like, that's what one of my friends, who's a conservative guy, said about Old Joy. He says, who cares? These people are old hippies, they're losers, I don't care. And he didn't want to watch the films. So I think that what she sees about Oregon, what she sees about Portland in particular, is that it's a place that for a lot of progressive people, it's geographically somewhat extreme within the country, so it's a place that a lot of people go when they're not necessarily happy anywhere else. And it's also just away from the commercial places that American movies are financed, made, shot, distributed, and released. She lives in New York, and she teaches at NYU. But you know, John Raymond is from Oregon, and I think she's a filmmaker who's very, I mean, I could have done a whole other lecture on how she uses scenery and the natural world. She's a very, very rural, kind of forest-based filmmaker. Even in Night Moves, it's all about landscape. Meek's Cutoff is about landscape. Old Joy, beautiful forest, mountain, tree, natural landscapes. So I think Oregon gives her that, gives her that as well. But I think that, you know, when you ask about Reichert and what she's been criticized for, I take a lot of pride, or I feel proud of her that she, especially with Night Moves, she's criticized by the right for basically, you know, making movies that are anti-American, that criticize capitalism and ideology. And she's criticized within the left for being too hard on the left, for being too hard on members of the counterculture, for being too hard on these environmentalists, or even in the case of Wendy and Lucy, being too hard on the sort of girl who might choose to drop out and live this way and see that she goes through something bad. I see the fact that people get mad on her on both sides to be very good, because I think most of the time filmmakers pander. If you're a right-wing filmmaker, you pander to the right. If you're a left-wing filmmaker, you pander to the left. She seems to have found another way so far through 5 films.
Thank you. Uma?
I really enjoyed your talk, different aspect. Something that I want to ask you is about how you characterize this film to be American. I also characterize it, but in like a more negative way, in a sense that when we watch Western movies, in the Western movies, the idea of the West, the idea of the other place is ever present. So the protagonist may reach it or may kind of do some bad things, but it's there. So here, Alaska is there. Alaska is that idea that you can reach it, right? It's not that she's going to Mexico, or she's kind of like kind of a war criminal, a war deserter going to another country. So it's still, that's why I characterize it to be within that ideology, even though it's trying to kind of get out of the ideology of Hollywood. And I think is that the choice of dog to me means that she's optimistic about this bonding with. Why didn't she choose cat? You know, why did she choose? Because it shows that she still thinks that America has this capacity. American dream has died, yes, but there is still this capacity
because a dog is what you have if you're an optimist and you want to explore, and a cat is what you have if, like me, you're a pessimist and you want to sit at home, because you cannot take a cat anywhere. Any road movie with a cat, that's why the Coen Brothers movie, Inside Llewyn Davis, is so funny, because it's about a guy who goes on the road with a cat. And or Harry and Tonto with Art Carney, is about a guy who goes on the road with a cat and it doesn't work. I think you're right that, to some extent, she doesn't want to believe in the usual myth, so she believes in another myth, you know, not go west, but go north. And she thinks that there's going to be something there for her, and part of that is because the guys at the beginning of the film tell her so. But that scene is really interesting if you listen to the dialogue. Does anyone remember what the guy's talking about at the...
Yeah. So actually she told him first that she's going to Alaska, and he's like, yeah, go.
But
He got really hammered one night with his buddies
Yeah.
and drove a cat across the construction.
Yeah, and got in huge trouble and got kind of kicked out. So you sort of see that wherever you go, even if there's a great situation waiting for you, you bring your failings and your frailties with you as well. Like I think that I like what you say, which is that the American dream has died, but she also still kind of believes in it. And I think that to some extent the film sympathizes with that, and I think to some extent the film sees it as a little bit foolish. But what I don't find in the film is judgment, even if it finds it foolish, or judgment, even if it finds it optimistic. I think it leaves the judgment to us, which I know sounds so cheesy, but when a movie does that well, I think it's a good thing.
Okay. I've got 3 people, and I really want to end it at 9:30 so we could have at least 1 hour for our open discussions. So Payman and Sirus and Behran. Payman, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. That was great. But still, I'm lost on why you like the movie, because because you explained that there's no judgment in the movie, and you like it because it gives us so much space to think about, and also ambiguity of it. But if that's the reason, I kind of disagree, because I thought there were so many scenes that were really boring and dull and could be replaced by in contrast that girls with other disenfranchised people, and they make it more interesting and also leave the ambiguity and atmosphere and character.
I think that that's fair. I think that that's the nature of subjective response, right? I mean, to me, the 2 things that you can do when you see a movie with someone else. I see movies for a living. I see movies with my wife. I teach about movies. So I know 2 things to be true. Any movie is interesting to talk about with someone else as long as both people are interested in talking about it. If someone doesn't like a movie, it doesn't mean that they're wrong. It also doesn't mean that they're right about the film. It's just, if a movie works for you, then you want to talk about it. And if it doesn't, no matter how intricate or how eloquent someone's case could be for it, and I'm not sure that mine was, but let's say it could be, it doesn't matter. So, I mean, when you ask why I like it, I guess I like it for reasons that are much simpler than anything we're talking about. I find it entertaining, I find it interesting, I find it moving, I don't find it to be too long, I find that my attention is engaged, and that's the first response. And everything else, I choose to make the effort to analyze because of that first response. If you or anyone else doesn't have that first response, then we're having not a bad conversation, but it's like a conversation along 2 parallel tracks. To me, there's nothing in the film that could be replaced, because everything that the movie is about is evident in what's in it. If she put other things in it, it would be a different film. Some of you mentioned the film is too long. Well, maybe. I mean, it's a short feature. Most movies are about 1 hour and 40 minutes. This is 1 hour and 20. If it was shorter, it would be a different film. If someone said, this is a movie that if the dog hadn't been in it, then who cares? Well, that's true. That it's a totally different film. If there's no dog in this movie, if she never loses the dog, then you're watching a different movie. It's a movie about a woman without a dog, and then maybe different things would happen in it. So I guess, I guess I wasn't even trying to explain why I like it. I'm just trying to explain what I think is happening in it, and just take it on as evident that I like it. But if you don't, or if that's not convincing, there's not much I'm going to be able to do, right? I'm not going to tell you to like it, nor are you going to tell me not to. So you have to talk about what's in it, not a question of, well, why do you like this?
I have a second question.
Can you hold on? So I can take Sirus and Behran, and if we have time, we'll come back to you. Sirus?
I'm going to go back to the stealing part that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Although there's no question that, in my opinion, stealing is wrong because it creates a wrong culture and wrong attitude. But at the same time, you have to take it in a context of what I think the movie was trying to say. And first of all, she was disoriented. Second of all, when I talked first about the hidden violence and the brutality of the status quo, is that we, in our society, we don't see the cheating in the taxes of the big corporations or big people. We don't see the bribery under the table. Those are different. But when she steals, which is wrong, we don't take it in the same context. And I think that's what I think she was trying to say.
Yeah, I think that's really eloquently said, and that's where the idea of proportion And that's where the idea, as you say, of context, and that's where the idea of the specificity of the situation does come into play. And whoever it was who mentioned that, I think it might have been you, that the store clerk is someone who would fit in a fascist society, that's sort of what that means, which is when it's about the letter of the law and not the spirit of the law, when it's about the rule and not sort of placing that rule in context, just unthinking obeisance to that rule, that is the root of authoritarianism and the sort of the root of the root of fascism. And America is a country that's supposedly founded on principles that are totally antithetical to that, and they are supposedly the country that intervened most strongly against that, in the 20th century. So then you see that it's sort of festering and fostering within this sort of small town. That said, I still find the character of that kid, given the realism of a lot of the rest of the film, I find him a bit much. But I think he's serving the function symbolically or rhetorically that you guys are
Doesn't it play
suggesting.
into all the stereotypes there? Like that kid was that young Christian
Yeah.
kind of
Not stereotype, archetype.
Well,
No,
These
that
types
was
of
the
reading
kid.
history.
The other guy was actually quite sympathetic. It was this kid that was antagonizing him to say, no, stick to it.
Something that we often say when we're reviewing stuff is, if you like something, it's an archetype, and if you don't, it's a cliche. It's all the. No. I mean, and I mean that very, very sincerely. That if you see a character in a film that reminds you of something, and you like that depiction, and it squares, you're like, this is a powerful archetypal film. This is distilling things down to the core. And if you don't, you're like, oh, what a cliched piece of crap.
Words are very important.
But he made us to take a stand, didn't he? The way that he acted,
All
he
the
made us take a
characters
stand.
just felt like they were very stereotypical.
And
they played their role, like the security guard played their
And
role.
where I absolutely agree with you is in the characterization of the kid. We're in total agreement. I think it's a very stereotypical part, and I don't like how it's written.
Okay. Behran, last question.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for digging and dragging so much from something that I thought it's nothing in the beginning. So yes.
That's literally what they try and pay me for sometimes.
And
Yeah, there's non-profit here.
But
Yeah.
one point you mentioned was very interesting to me about how the neighbor is criticized for being too hard on socialists. Looking at that, could be this film about criticizing those hillbilly socialists that are pretending to be socialists, but they have no idea about the real poverty, that they don't fit because not fitting is a fashion. They are socialists because being a socialist is a fashion, but they don't have any idea about. And even in some cases, this girl is not desperate about money. She just gives away cans, and she always has a glass raising there that could be a reservoir for the money. And she, as you mentioned, we can see her future in the movie by that guy who's around. So maybe she's, instead of being left, is so right.
Well, to nuance your point, and the thing I like about your point is, not only did you take that from this film, if you see her other movies, that is so much what they are about, is the question of real, progressive, liberal values versus what happens when they get adopted by people. And that's why I think it's a lot like Night Moves. Night Moves is this film where this young guy played by Jesse Eisenberg is living on a commune, a kind of self-sustaining agricultural commune. They grow their own food, they farm their own land, and they're doing what you're supposed to do if you believe in that stuff. It's just too slow for him. So even though it's everything that vision of life is supposed to be, it's off the grid, it's de-technologized, you're happy, you're living collectively, that's really what the values are about. He says, well, that's really boring. And I really want to hurt these people and hit them where they live. So then it's that question of, do you keep to yourself if you're a political person, or do you act? And if you act in a country where there is so much economic violence and so much inequality, well, do you have to become a terrorist? And if you become a terrorist, are you heroic or are you an enemy? And in that film, the character is too young, I think, to know any better, and that's why the film is so powerful. Here, you also have a young character who's maybe too young to know what she got into when she set out on this road trip. But just to nuance your point, not because I disagree with you, but just to make it even more clear, I don't think it's that she has a lot of money anymore. I think that the freeness that she has with that money may be something that used to be her life, and that's why she does it that way. But again, let's not mistake, when you have $500 And you're not solving your problem with the car by saying, oh, dude, there's an ATM around the corner, I'll be right back.
And she doesn't live with poverty.
No, I don't think she's lived with poverty, but now.
I mean, she has an actual money bill. That's a bit of a.
She does, yes,
contradiction.
she has a money belt, which is something that someone who once had money would have. But now, whatever the source of that money was, whether it's like parents giving her allowance, or a job that she quit, or a husband that she left, or whatever, she doesn't have it anymore. So it's not that it's about someone who has money and doesn't know the value of it. It's that someone who may have grown up not really understanding the value of money, but when you just have $500, whether you used to be rich or you're poor, you have nothing.
For all of your life, $500.
That's all that she has. You know, and again, this would be a very, very different movie if she told the mechanic, hold on, I'll call my parents. Or where's there an ATM? It wouldn't be this film anymore. So this is not to disagree with you, it's that I think what you say is very perceptive. The way she treats money is not the way that someone who is poor would treat money, but what's the difference? If she doesn't have any more than that, if that's all that she has no plan beyond that, and that's supposed to get her to Alaska, and that's the next place anyone's going to pay her anything, whether she's born into it, or adopted, or tried for it, or failed something else, it's the same thing.
Yeah, my point was maybe when she chooses to
Yeah.
get money like that it's something that, it's somehow fake.
Well, and the gentleman who, I think one of the best points, it's a gentleman who left already, but the guy who was here in the baseball hat, who noticed the Ken Kesey book, yeah, because that's what that literature and that's what that reading in your young life sort of teaches you, which is, there's value beyond the material world, and it's, it's about a world of ideas and all that. And I think, sometimes that idea of drop out and, live on your own terms and detach from society, there's a real cost to that. And people don't know what they're getting into almost until it's too late. I don't think that the film is like anti-socialist or anti-left wing, but I think it's a nuanced, critical consideration of it. So, I think for someone who didn't enjoy the film when we were talking at the beginning, I think you've seen very clearly something that's in it. I highly recommend you see her other films if you find that idea interesting.
Okay, thank you very much.
I have another question.
We'll discuss it in a second.
I may have to go, but I'll let you know in a second.